Have you ever encountered something just absolutely beautiful, completely intriguing, yet instinctively known deep down in your bones that you had to just walk away from it?
Oh, yeah. That is a very specific, very tough feeling.
Right. It really is. Well, today we are doing a highly customized deep dive, and our mission is to unpack this singular, really fascinating journal entry. It's titled Notes on Gardening, Part 881.
Written by a gardener named Ang.
Right. Yes, exactly. Published back in late April of 2026. Okay, let's unpack this. We begin with Ang on this totally unplanned detour, just visiting a local plant nursery.
A dangerous place for a gardener to take a detour.
Oh, absolutely. The worst or the best, depending on how you look at it. But Ang is just scouting for new species, to evaluate for propagation. It's totally spontaneous. And right there, among all the varied foliage, Ang spots the Agapanthus.
And it stands out.
It visually dominates the space. The entry describes these striking clusters of lavender-blue, trumpet-shaped petals, and they're set against these long, scrappy green leaves.
Well, what's fascinating here is how human perception works in an environment like that. Because biologically speaking, that plant is designed to command attention.
Right, it's not an accident.
Not at all. The structure of those blooms, they're arranged in the spherical cluster at the top of a very tall, completely leafless stalk.
So it's just hovering up there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It creates this massive visual impact from a distance. It elevates the vibrant color way above the surrounding greenery, which it's just a highly effective evolutionary strategy for attracting pollinators. In a crowded nursery setting, it essentially acts as a billboard.
A billboard for bees and apparently for passing gardeners.
Yeah, exactly.
But that visual dominance immediately leads into this really fascinating detail in Ang's notes. The common name for this plant locally is the lily of the Nile.
Which sounds incredibly majestic.
It does. It sounds ancient and regal, but the text makes it very clear it isn't a lily at all.
No, not even close.
It isn't even in the same botanical family. It earned that moniker simply because locals recognize some, vague physical similarities to actual lilies.
Specifically that trumpet shape of the petals.
Right. They saw the shape and just adopted the name. It is a complete botanical misnomer.
So what does this all mean for how we trust the labels given to things at a glance? Because it reminds me of how we call a koala bear.
Even though it's a marsupial.
Right. It has zero relation to bears.
Yep.
Or like a jellyfish, which is absolutely not a fish. We seem to have this deep-seated psychological need to categorize the unknown by anchoring it to whatever is most familiar.
We do. And from a cognitive perspective, our brains are fundamentally pattern-matching machines. Navigating a complex, data-rich world, it requires a tremendous amount of cognitive energy.
It's exhausting.
It is. So to manage that load, the brain relies heavily on heuristics, which are essentially...
mental shortcuts. Exactly. Mental shortcuts. When the locals who originally named the lily of the Nile saw those trumpet-shaped petals, their brains didn't perform a rigorous botanical analysis of the plant's reproductive organs, right?
Right. They weren't busting out the microscopes.
They used the visual heuristic. They saw a shape that resembled a lily. They knew they were geographically near the Nile, and bam, the label was born out of pure utility.
It's a filter. It allows a whole community to just say, close enough, we know what we're talking about, let's move on.
Yeah, exactly. It's about communication, not scientific rigor.
But the visual cues, the striking lavender color, that familiar trumpet shape, they're so loud that they completely hijack the public consensus. The accepted identity becomes based almost entirely on a superficial resemblance.
Which means that when we look at labels, particularly common names, we are often looking at a history of human convenience rather than objective truth.
Oh, that's a great way to put it. Human convenience.
And that visual appeal was so strong it overrode botanical reality, which really sets the stage for the conflict in Ang's journal.
Because Ang doesn't just admire the flower and walk away. Ang actually starts researching the mechanics of how to grow and propagate it in a home garden.
And that research pulls back the curtain on the Agapanthus.
It really does. We transition right away from the deceptive, beautiful surface, and we get straight into its demanding biology. Ang looks into propagation and hits a huge wall.
A multi-year wall.
Yes. The text notes that growing the Agapanthus from seed is an absolute, quote-unquote, test of patience. The journal specifies that it takes 2 to 3 years of growth just to produce a single bloom.
Which is a long time to stare at a pot of dirt.
Right. And Ang points out that this extended timeline is the defining hint that the species is a perennial. So because of this massive time sink, Ang concludes that seed propagation just isn't viable for the impatient gardener.
Suggesting that propagation by division is the fastest way forward.
Right. But, I mean, I really have to push back on Ang's logic here for a second.
Oh, yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
isn't the fundamental premise of gardening inherently tied to patience?
I mean, generally, yes.
You put a dormant seed in the dirt, you provide water and light, and you wait. And the journal explicitly mentions that Ang has been gardening for many moons. If you have years of experience playing in the dirt, why would a 2 to 3 year wait suddenly be a deal breaker?
It seems contradictory, right?
Exactly. Isn't the waiting part of the reward?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, that assumes patience is an infinite resource, which is actually a pretty common misconception about how experienced practitioners operate.
Okay, so it's not infinite.
No, not at all. If we examine this through the lens of a mature garden, time and biological energy are strictly finite resources. We have to look at the energy distribution strategies of different plants.
Like annuals versus perennials.
Precisely. Annuals, for example, throw a massive amount of their biological energy into an immediate, flashy, floral display. They have to, because their entire life cycle, germination, reproduction, death, it all happens in a single season.
They live fast.
They live very fast. Perennials, like the Agapanthus, utilize a completely different evolutionary strategy. They're playing a very long game.
So for those first 2 to 3 years when there are no flowers, the plant isn't just like sitting dormant.
Oh no, it's actively working, but the work is completely hidden.
Oh, wow.
A seed contains a tiny embryo and a very limited food supply. It's called the endosperm. When an Agapanthus seed germinates, it faces a high mortality environment. Instead of rushing to produce a pretty flower, it furiously builds a massive, complex, invisible infrastructure underground.
Like a root system.
Yes, a robust root system. It's establishing a vascular network to transport water, storing carbohydrates. It is building a fortress to ensure it can survive for decades, endure droughts, outcompete weeds.
That's incredible.
All that takes immense biological energy, which is exactly why there's nothing left over to produce a bloom for the first few years.
So Ang is evaluating this plant specifically for propagation, not just buying a mature one at the nursery to stick in the ground. Staring down the barrel of a 3-year wait just to see if the seed even survives its most vulnerable phase.
Yeah, that's a major consideration.
Which brings us to the alternative Ang mentions in the text, propagation by division.
Right, the workaround.
It is a crucial biological workaround. Instead of starting from a fragile seed, you take a mature Agapanthus and physically split its established root ball. Mechanically, you're dividing the meristematic tissue.
The what tissue?
Meristematic. It's the plant cells capable of continuous growth. So by doing this, you're creating an exact clone that already possesses a fully functioning vascular system, mature defensive mechanisms, and stored nutrient reserves.
It fundamentally changes the equation. It's like the difference between buying an empty plot of land and trying to frame a house from scratch while hoping a storm doesn't wash away your foundation.
Right.
Versus buying a house that's already built and you're just, adding a new coat of paint. You completely bypass the high mortality phase. That infrastructure analogy is perfect. Propagation by division gives you a plant that will likely thrive and bloom almost immediately because the underground work was completed years ago.
Okay, that makes so much sense.
So when Ang notes that seed propagation isn't viable for the quote-unquote impatient gardener, it's not a confession of lacking virtue.
It's not about being lazy.
No, it is a calculated assessment of resource management. Ang is managing the time economy of the garden. True gardening expertise isn't about having infinite patience. It's about choosing exactly where to spend that finite patience for the highest yield.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because this massive required investment of time, even with the workaround of division, leads directly to the climax of the journal entry.
Right, the twist.
Ang loves the look of this plant. The lavender-blue flowers are visually magnetic. Ang understands the botanical reality beneath the surface and even knows the exact mechanical technique to bypass the multi-year wait.
Has all the knowledge.
Has all the knowledge. But despite possessing all of this, and despite the intense visual appeal, Ang makes a totally surprising choice. Ang leaves the nursery without a specimen, just walks away.
It's a remarkable demonstration of restraint, especially, in an environment designed to encourage acquisition.
Right. Nurseries are basically curated to trigger that exact impulse to buy beautiful things.
But the reasoning Ang provides for walking away isn't like a spreadsheet calculation of time and energy. It's not framed as a purely logical deduction.
No, Ang explicitly describes it as a gut feeling. a feeling developed after, quote, so many moons immersed in gardening. This intuition tells Ang that the Agapanthus, regardless of its beauty or how easy it might be to divide it, will simply not thrive in their unique microclimate or mesh with their personal gardening style.
This raises an important question, because those two terms, microclimate and gardening style, they carry an immense amount of weight in horticultural practice.
How so?
Well, they represent the synthesis of environmental reality and behavioral reality.
So it's like, think of a seasoned master chef walking through a really high-end, bustling farmer's market.
Okay, I'm with you.
They spot this incredibly rare, pristine ingredient, maybe like a beautiful exotic sea urchin. They know the ingredient is stunning. They possess the precise technical knife skills to prepare it flawlessly. Yet they walk right past it.
Because it doesn't fit the menu.
Exactly, because they run a rustic, wood-fired pizza restaurant up in the mountains.
Yeah.
The sea urchin is objectively wonderful, but it fundamentally clashes with their specific culinary identity. It requires profound professional restraint to walk away from an excellent thing simply because it isn't the right thing for your specific context.
That captures the dynamic beautifully.
Yeah.
And it forces us to reevaluate how we define true expertise.
Yeah.
Yeah, culturally, we tend to view expertise as just an accumulation of technical knowledge. Knowing the mechanics of how to execute a task, like knowing how to propagate a perennial by dividing its meristematic tissue instead of gambling on a seed.
Right, the technical know-how.
But Eng's decision demonstrates that the highest tier of mastery goes way beyond technical execution. It's the accumulated wisdom to know what actually belongs in your system in the first place.
So the wisdom is essentially the ability to say no to your own impulses. But Eng calls it a gut feeling. That phrasing almost makes it sound, I don't know, mystical, or like a lucky guess rather than the result of rigorous expertise.
It often feels mystical to the person experiencing it. But cognitive psychology tells us intuition is highly practical. It is essentially crystallized experience.
Crystallized experience.
Right. Over those many moons of gardening, Eng has undoubtedly purchased beautiful plants on an impulse, planted them in the wrong spot, and just watched them slowly die.
Oh, definitely. Every gardener has that graveyard.
Exactly. And the brain records every single one of those failures. It catalogs the soil conditions, the watering schedules, the sunlight hours. So when Eng looks at the Agapanthus, the brain rapidly cross-references the plant's biological needs against decades of past failures and successes.
All happening in a split second.
Yes. It happens so quickly, totally below the level of conscious thought, that it registers physically as a gut feeling.
So the intuition is actually just rapid pattern recognition built on a massive mountain of past mistakes. It is data processing disguised as an instinct.
Exactly that. And Eng applies this rapid processing to two distinct realities here. The first is the microclimate. Now, a microclimate isn't just knowing you live in a specific agricultural zone or a certain city.
It's more specific than that.
It's hyperlocal environmental awareness. It means knowing exactly how the afternoon sun reflects off the brick wall of your house to create a heat sink, or understanding the precise drainage rate of the clay soil in the left corner of your yard.
Right, or the weird wind tunnel between your house and the neighbor's fence.
Yes. An Agapanthus might thrive 10 feet away in a neighbor's yard, but fail completely in your specific microclimate.
It is the ultimate acceptance of your physical reality. I mean, you can't argue with the drainage of your soil.
No, you really can't.
And the second reality Ang mentions is gardening style, which seems to point inward toward self-awareness rather than outward at the environment.
It does. Gardening style acknowledges the human element in the ecosystem. It forces the gardener to ask, what are my actual habits?
Right. Who am I, really?
Do I enjoy meticulously tending to delicate plants with complex watering needs every single morning before work? Or, realistically, do I prefer hardy, drought-tolerant species that thrive on neglect because I travel all the time?
By recognizing that the Agapanthus doesn't fit this style, Ang is exhibiting a super high level of self-awareness. True mastery is accepting the unvarnished realities of both your physical environment and your own behavioral limitations.
And refusing to force a plant into that system just because the flowers look pretty at the nursery?
Refusing to force a fit just because the surface is appealing. Man, that principle really crystallizes the entire progression of Ang's journal entry.
It really ties it all together.
We started our deep dive by following an unplanned detour into a plant nursery, where we were immediately lured in by the striking, deceptive beauty of a plant misnamed the lily of the Nile. We saw how powerful visual heuristics can completely override objective botanical truth.
tricking a local population into categorizing the unknown based purely on human convenience.
Exactly. And from there, we dug beneath that attractive surface to uncover the demanding, invisible biological reality of the plant. We explored the multi-year energy investment required by perennial seeds, the necessity of underground root hoarding, and the strategy of bypassing that vulnerable timeline through division.
And ultimately, that biological reality brought us to the final critical lesson of the text.
The hard-earned power of trusting your own crystallized experience, the profound restraint required to simply walk away. So, as you reflect on this, consider how universally this progression applies completely outside the garden.
Oh, it applies everywhere.
Whether you are navigating a complex career move, evaluating a new relationship, or adopting a new habit, understanding the unyielding realities of your own personal microclimate and your behavioral style is paramount. It's the exact framework that allows you to confidently decline opportunities that look absolutely perfect on the surface, but fundamentally clash with your reality.
Cultivating that level of self-awareness acts as your primary defense against the misleading labels and shiny superficial appeals that constantly surround us.
Absolutely. So keep that in mind the next time you find yourself totally captivated by something new. If a plant named for a mere visual resemblance can fool an entire community, and a beautiful perennial bloom can mask a grueling multi-year waiting game in the soil, how much of what you try to force into your own life is based purely on its stunning surface appeal, rather than an intuitive, hard-earned understanding of what will actually survive and thrive in your specific environment? Think about what beautiful things you might need to leave at the nursery.